Okay, so Today FM is a new radio station that has started in New Zealand today. It's being set up actively as a station for every New Zealander. I know, and I've seen some of the kind of what's the word? It's the vision boards that the station has got for what they're trying to achieve, and they one of their visions or one of their inspirations was to look at an advert from a Danish TV company. If you want to look it up, just look it up. Danish TV company advert. It might even be called Channel 2, and it's an advert where very clearly they segment off parts of society. So all the gym goers are in a square, all the mums with prams are in a square, all the elderly people are in a square, all the hoodie wearing teenagers are in a square. But then what they very cleverly do as a part of this advert is they go, who was the class clown? And people from every square come out. And that was part of the kind of vision for Today FM, because what they did when they're setting it up is they wanted to be, and they want to be, something that no matter where you are in society, what sector you're in, they want to be able to pull you in with something. So it'll have quite a broad reach. Criticisms by some of the concept is that's sort of what RNZ does. And if this is RNZ with adverts, will anyone listen to it? That's to be determined. I have no criticism. I actually think that their aspirations are amazing. I think if they can do it, it will be an amazing radio station, pulling in all aspects of society. Whether they can or can't will be another one. It could be a huge train wreck as well, because when you're the jack of all trades, you become the master of none. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I imagine that they've got lots of big names, don't they? But yeah, it seems like they're trying to be a bit softer than their rival NZ Talk, News Talk ZB.
Yep.
As one report put it, instead of the bile of COVID or cycleways that you see on News Talk ZB opinion sections, the opinion sections on Today FM are like Lloyd Bird talking about how he loves Silver Beat, for example, and nice stuff like that. But and I imagine like it won't just be the sort of public interest stuff of New Zealand, of RNZ Radio New Zealand. It might have the more sort of, I guess, softer lifestyle stories and that sort of thing that you might see on Stuff.
Yeah,
for example.
Yeah. This is as we're going live here. This is what's happening on the station right
Projections
now.
On that one. Had we not had Robert Muldoon not got rid of the super scheme that Bill Rowling built sort of introduced, some people estimate we could have had up to about $400 billion.
It is funny that you talk about softer and all this kind of stuff. And the first thing that I heard when I flicked over was them talking about politics from the 1980s. Sounds very ZB, that one little line. But I mean, I'm my tongue's in my cheek. Obviously, that's not what they're aiming for. But it'll be interesting because how you're describing it sounds like lifestyle radio, and there's been lifestyle radio before. In fact, the person who was running the station, Dallas Gurney, was running some stations that were kind of more lifestyle. One that Simon Della used to work on, I think it was called Mix FM, and it was kind of an Auckland only one, and it was music station, but it had big 10-15 minute blocks of talk as well, where they were doing very much lifestyle. So it'll be really interesting. I think the aspirational part of it to, we talk about constantly the world becoming tribal, and what they're saying is within those tribes there are similarities. Let's pull the similarities out. So rather than looking at the tribal aspect of talkback and just talk to the conservative 70-year-old white people, let's actually say in that conservative 70-year-old white people, there's topics that are going to work with people who are also, progressive and 25 and, and middle of the range and 40. And if they can do it, it'll be really interesting. I wonder if that kind of model in America would work better, because in the US, you've got 330 million people to pull from. So if you only do 1 or 2%, it's still a really big audience. In New Zealand, the audience is so much smaller, and it's getting smaller. Oh, maybe not every day. Radio is still doing very well in New Zealand. But, if you pull 1 or 2%, it's an unsuccessful radio station that can't sustain itself. But if these guys need to be up there with ZB, they need to be 10 to 15% of the marketplace for the amount of money and the talent they've got, what they're throwing at it. But I guess we'll see.
And the way that the medium is, I guess they can center it around a radio station, but then push the audio out to social media platforms and have the odd written opinion piece on their website. So yeah, it's really following that multiple medium way of doing things that we've seen from other platforms.
I don't know if you can see my phone. It's probably still doing this in case we get a personal message come up, but see all those notifications? You can see those notifications on my phone. So that is NZ Herald stuff, News Hub, One News, the New York Times. So I get a lot of news notifications to my phone. I noticed this morning when they put out a message from Mike Hosking's breakfast show, that was tagged at the end of it on New Zealand's biggest radio station, which they've never done before. But it was interesting to see it this morning on the same day that Today FM launched, that they wanted to kind of say, do you see the size of my penis? Can you see it? Here it is. Frump. And I've never seen them do that before in any of those notifications. But all well and good to NZME. They are dominating the marketplace in talk. Not much else. MediaWorks is certainly king of the hill when it comes to music. But they want to keep it out there. So let's have a look. I've got a couple of clips here from an interview with Winston Peters this morning and Tova O'Brien. Tova O'Brien, of course, was known quite well, especially through that pandemic period, as a real hard-nosed, ask the question, don't you dare fucking not answer my question kind of reporter. Again, with that idea of trying to be, the everyman radio station, would her style fit? I mean, it's her first day, but her tone already sounds a lot softer. And, one of these clips, like, I don't know, maybe because I just want to know, it's a different vibe, which is what they'll probably have to do to try and hit what they're attempting to do. Now, if what they're attempting to do doesn't work, you might hear Tova go harder and harder and harder and harder, as in more firm. But again, look, this is day one. We're not suggesting that this is indicative of the rest of, the next 364 days. But so she was talking to Winston Peters this morning, and the first thing she did was she identified him as a staunch opponent of mandates. This is what Winston had to say.
Good morning. But look, I was not a staunch opponent of vaccine mandates. I'm a staunch opponent of them being kept on far too long.
Okay.
When we didn't have the utilities that we've got now, they made sense, but they've long since lost the sense of the logic to them.
So Winston Peters, he's always been a genius at playing both sides. He'll be able to be out there and say, the government is doing too much with vaccines and too much with mandates, but then to his constituents who are primarily older, he'll be like, vaccines are really important and we got to stay healthy. He's always been a genius at that, and he is the one politician that I've ever interacted with that can say one thing to your face and convince you of it, and then in the next interview say completely the opposite and convince that person of it. So he did that. Tova went on to actually ask him bluntly if he had COVID, and I don't know if it's a valid question or not, but this was his reply.
You haven't had COVID, have you?
No. How on earth would you ask that question? The answer is no.
Well, curious, and I saw you walking around without a mask among people who turned out to be a bit of a super spreader event.
So that whole line of curious, you can hear that it's more. I mean, that's in that particular, it's more relaxed and laid back, which is great. Speaking of that super spreader event, Winston Peters talked about attending the protest in Wellington. He talked about how fantastic the people of the protesters were. Again, he's doing very well at playing that card, looking for support. It was reported at the end of this piece that some people had messaged in thanking Winston Peters for being at the protest. So that, he was saying the right things to that audience for that moment. But then also at the end of this, in fact, this is something I'm going to ask you about, George, as someone who works with, I guess Gen Zs and above in journalism. When Winston came on, he asked them not to ask him about Tauranga. So what he's basically saying is, I'll come on, but I don't want to talk about Tauranga. So the first part of this clip, he's talking about the protest, and then we'll play Tova's question and play that out. Here we go.
Well, I got no idea what that thing was doing at all. And the reality was that you had a protest at Parliament. And over the years, in fact, for centuries, when there has been protests, people have been talked to. In this one unique case, every parliamentarian, led by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, decided they wouldn't talk to them, just boycott them. Even worse, they were calling some people scum. Now, look, I happen to have been persuaded to go in the very end by a business that was going for 52 years and going bust because the government would not allow certain changes in parts of this country's economy. 52 years and going bust, and one of those people was there. And that was the person that was persuaded me something had to be done. Somebody needed to talk to them. And to call them all criminals and this and that and scum, I think it's a darn disgrace. And how you can get away with it as a Labour Party cabinet minister is beyond me.
Well, probably you can't make sweeping generalisations about anyone at the protest, but they were your example, slightly marred by the fact that people were out there holding signs talking about lynching politicians and journalists.
Well, yeah, that's a fraction of idiots and nutcases and everything else. You'll always get those. And every protest I've ever seen has had the marginalisation of people misusing the event. But the mass majority were ordinary, decent people. I saw business people, lawyers, doctors, all sorts of people that were there. And
well, this is the genius of Winston Peters. So what he's saying is there was a few bad eggs amongst that group of people, but what he's not acknowledging is, I don't know who he's talking about, who called them scums and criminals and that kind of stuff from the political side of things in the beehive or in the parliament. But you could equally argue there were a few, if that did happen, if there were one or two politicians who said that, it's exactly the same argument. One or two politicians called them scum and this and that and the other thing, but the vast majority of politicians didn't. So it's the same argument that he's using to support his narrative, which could equally be used the other way. There was a few terrible protesters saying terrible things. There was a few terrible politicians saying terrible things. But this is the genius of what Winston does. He doesn't actually then acknowledge his argument is equal and opposite the other way. Let's keep going.
To image him as that, I think is just shameful.
You've told my producer... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
You've told my producer that you don't want to talk about Tauranga and whether you'll stand in the by-election. Is that because you haven't decided yet whether you want to stand?
Look, you have a lovely day.
No, but Mr. Peters, are you going to stand in the Tauranga by-election?
And he's gone.
Beep, beep,
yeah.
beep.
So we'll leave it there. And he's gone. So it was interesting. Yeah. You know, Winston Peters is a consummate professional when it comes to communicating. I'm not suggesting I'm saying that because it's either good or bad, but it's what he does. George, a question for you, man, as someone who works with journalist students, telling a producer not to ask you about that and then asking you about it, valid, rude, not good journalistic practice? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. They must feel confident enough that they're going to have Winston Peters back, you know, regardless of not doing that. I mean, it is, I guess, a sort of, it's not an endorsement from Winston Peters of Today FM, but it is that they start off their week, their launch with having Winston Peters on, when you'll remember last week we had trouble finding if he'd been anywhere in the media talking about Tauranga, which he hadn't. And then this week he is on Today FM. I mean, maybe that does indicate that he is thinking of a run in Tauranga. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess it shows that Tova O'Brien and Today FM are in an influential enough spot that they can feel like they can do that without burning any bridges and that sort of thing. They realize that Winston relies on them as much as the other way around. And I guess, it's they can sort of poke the bear of Winston Peters without it really having any consequences. And Winston Peters plays this character, right? That gets angry with journalists and has disagreements with them and hangs up. That's totally part of his character, and he's more than happy to play along with that as well. As for the going to the mandate, again, it was just sort of expertly played both sides, right? He's like, I was just hanging out there because no one would talk to them, right? Yeah. But you know, he's there without the mask on, and it's obvious what he's up to, right?
I do think as well, though, about the power of Today FM, and there's a huge budget behind it, right? But I can think of 4 or 5 politicians that I'm sure they would have wanted to have rather than Winston. So the power of pulling Winston in is one thing, but you know, we can all think of who the best gets would have been. I mean, obviously number one would have been the PM. That would have been the best get because, you know, she watches her time carefully and contributes carefully to various radio stations. I think internationally, you know, there's people who like Zelensky and stuff who was obviously be any CNN or MSNBC would be lucky to get him. But even in New Zealand, I mean, Simon Bridges, who's created big news last week, it just feels like that maybe they got him on board and maybe it shows something. But at the moment, Winston Peters, his I was going to say value. I'm trying to think of the word meaning, you know, where he places in the order of importance in politics in New Zealand is pretty down the scale. I mean, shows how pathetic we are that we can't even get close to people like Winston. But you know what I'm saying is, for this station, maybe so, maybe not. And look, it's going to be interesting to see how they go and where they go. But yeah,
yep. He has his phases of being accessible to media, like, you know, at Radio 1 student media down here in Dunedin, we used to have him on, right, which I always felt was weird. And then, you know, there'll be eras, you know, months or during elections where he's making himself available. And now, like last week, he wouldn't make himself available to talk about Tauranga. And, you know, I feel like he was pretty quiet around the mandate stuff in Wellington. I feel like he didn't make many appearances. But, you know, you're right. It's not a huge get. I guess, like, if a politician like Winston Peters tells your producer, don't ask me about this, then you're almost obliged to ask him about that, to at least even just get a reaction.
See, I wonder, though, it's a condition of coming on. I mean, like, you know, if you say, well, I'll come on, but don't ask me about this, and then you ask him about it. I mean, I wonder about journalistic practice and that kind of stuff. It's a bit, you know, like, don't reveal your sources. I mean, go, well, if I reveal them, it doesn't really matter. I know it's a different seriousness of it, but I don't know. I mean, I to be honest with you, you know what, we do this. I also do a podcast that we're going to play some of that footage later on today, actually. That is kind of hour to hour and a half conversations. I don't think there's ever been anything that someone's asked me not to talk about. And if there was, I probably wouldn't have them as a guest.